Welcome back, deep divers. Today we're cracking open occult archives. But hold on, put away those ghost hunting kits. We're not talking about spooky stories in the literal sense.
No, no, not at all. We're more interested in the books themselves, the ones that have earned, let's say, a reputation,
Yeah,
for being mysterious, a bit dangerous maybe, or holding knowledge that wasn't meant for everyone.
right, exactly. Like that forbidden section in the library you always wanted to sneak into.
Right.
And our deep dive today, well, it takes us right into the heart of a book with a title that just screams mystery. Ahiman Rezon, The Restricted Constitution of Freemasonry and the Secret Law of the Prepared Brother. Episode 229 for those who like to keep track. Just reading that title, it's like restricted, secret law, prepared brother. What have we gotten ourselves into?
It's a real page turner, that's for sure. It makes you think, about those whispers of hidden knowledge, rules that only a select few understand. It's all very cloak and dagger. But today, we want to go beyond the surface, beyond the whispers. What was this book truly used for? What's actually inside it? And why has it caused so much debate and interpretation over the years?
Well, lucky for us, we've got some great material to work with. Excerpts from the 1865 Ahiman Rezon, edited by Daniel Sickels. And this edition doesn't hold back. It digs into the potential meanings of that mysterious title, breaks down Masonic symbols, walks us through rituals, even lays out the rules that governed Freemasons back then. So to kick things off, let's start with that title, Ahiman Rezon. What have our sources revealed about what it all means?
Well, right off the bat, this edition mentions some early attempts to decipher it. One big name, Dalcho, proposed that it came from Hebrew, translating to the secrets of a prepared brother. But here's the thing, and this is what's so interesting. Even back then, people weren't so sure about that. The text actually presents some pretty solid counter-arguments based on, well, the Hebrew language itself.
Oh, that's interesting. So what were the main issues they had with this Hebrew translation?
A couple of things. First, they pointed out that if the secrets of a prepared brother was really what they meant, the typical Hebrew sentence structure would put those words in a different order. Like, it should be something closer to brother prepared secrets. Like how we say glue car in English, not car blue. The adjective usually comes before the noun. So the whole prepared brother secrets felt off, grammatically speaking, for Hebrew. The text even uses the phrase, the great work of Jehovah, as an example, showing how word order is super important in Hebrew.
So the order of the words just didn't add up. What else did they find problematic?
Well, they took a close look at the Hebrew words themselves. The word to divide, or to number, M-N-E, which you could stretch to mean appoint or prepare, changes its pronunciation depending on how it's used in a sentence. And the argument was, if this word was indeed part of Ahiman, we should be seeing a slightly different form of it. The linguistics just didn't quite match up.
Okay, so even at the word level, there are some red flags. And what about Rezon, the part that supposedly means secret? Did that hold up?
Not really. While they acknowledged that a similar word in Chaldean, RZ meaning secret, could have made its way into Hebrew, the plural form was a problem. It just didn't line up grammatically. But here's the biggest catch, and the text kind of hints at this. How can a published book, something everyone can read, be about secrets? It's like calling a public park the hidden garden. The logic just doesn't track.
That's a good point. It's a bit contradictory, isn't it? So if Delcho's translation was so shaky, were there any other attempts to figure out this title?
Oh, definitely. Another Masonic scholar, Dr. Mackey, offered a different perspective. He suggested it came from three Hebrew words. Ahim, brothers, mana, to appoint, and ratzon, law. Put those together and you get the law of appointed brothers or something like that.
Ah, that does make a lot more sense considering it's a constitution, a set of rules. Did this version also get some pushback?
It did. Even though the text mentions it fits better with what the book is actually about. The main problem was that mana verb again. While it can mean to appoint, its more common meaning is simply to number. And remember that final he sound in Ahiman? That was another point of contention because it didn't quite fit perfectly with the proposed root words ahem and mana.
So it seems like even for those who really know this stuff, the exact meaning of Ahiman Rezon is still up for debate. You'd think they'd have it figured out by now. It makes you wonder, though, why would this kind of mystery be so appealing to people, especially those who are into, hidden knowledge?
Well, for anyone fascinated by secret societies and the idea that there's more than meets the eye, a title like this is irresistible bait. It suggests that even the name itself holds some kind of deeper meaning, a secret code waiting to be cracked. And if you're into language and history, it's a puzzle, trying to untangle the origins of words, tracing how they've been used over time. It hints that maybe within these traditions, not everything is clear-cut or agreed upon.
It sets the stage for a book full of symbolism, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, our source goes into detail about the frontispiece, specifically the entered apprentice tracing board. Now, for those who aren't familiar with Masonic lingo, what exactly is a tracing board, and what can we learn from this early 1800s reproduction based on Bro George Oliver's work?
Think of a tracing board as like a visual aid used in Masonic lodges. It's a symbolic representation of the lodge itself and its core principles, often used during lectures and instruction. This particular one from the early 1800s is shaped like an oblong square, and it's aligned with the cardinal directions north, east, south, west. It's like a map, but a map of meaning meant to guide the initiate.
So who are the key players in this symbolic space and where are they located?
Well, the worshipful master, the head honcho of the lodge, is symbolically placed in the east, with an altar in front of him. Interestingly, this older version shows both senior and junior wardens in the west. It was a common practice in many lodges before things got standardized in 1813, when they decided to put the senior warden in the west and the junior warden in the south. It's a little detail that shows how even symbolic arrangements can change over time.
That's fascinating. It's like the symbols themselves have a history, a story to tell. What about the lighting and other symbolic objects?
We see 3 lights strategically placed in the northeast, southeast, and southwest. Then over towards the west, we have the famous pillars J and B. They're traditionally interpreted as strength and wisdom, and they're depicted here in the Corinthian style. If you're not an architecture buff, Corinthian columns are super ornate, with elaborate capitals decorated with leaves. Right in the center is the blazing star, 5 points, with a G in the middle and the word beauty inscribed. Between the pillars, rising up from the west, there are 7 steps on a mosaic pavement, though this early version skips the usual checkered border. Finally, we have 3 windows, one in the east, one west, and one south. Essentially, the entered apprentice tracing board is a visual representation of the lodge's core structure and principles, orienting the new member within this symbolic space and emphasizing wisdom, strength, and beauty as key values.
It sounds like a very deliberately crafted space full of meaning. And where do the working master's tracing board and those immovable jewels come into play?
Right, so the working master's tracing board sits near the blazing star. The immovable jewels, which are described as a rough ashlar, basically an unhewn stone, a perfect ashlar, the squared finished stone, with a plumb rule and square, and a pointed cubical stone with an axe stuck in it, those are all positioned higher up toward the east. To further symbolize the directions, the east is represented by a square, south by level, and north by a plumb rule. And wrapping around the entire tracing board is a cable tow, like a rope, with tassels on each end. This cable tow represents the connection, the bond, between members of the lodge.
It's amazing how much symbolism is packed into this one image. Even for someone just starting their Masonic journey, it's clear this is not just random stuff thrown together. So, moving beyond the visual, what does Ahiman Rezon tell us about the core principles and purpose of Freemasonry?
Well, it quotes what it calls an elegant writer who defines Freemasonry as an institution founded on eternal reason and truth, whose dear basis is the civilization of mankind, and whose everlasting glory is supported by those 2 mighty pillars, science and morality. That's a pretty bold statement, laying out a lofty goal for the organization.
That's a pretty ambitious aim.
Absolutely. It's basically saying every Freemason is expected to contribute, to bring their own good ideas to the table, all to build this grand temple of truth, one that eventually encompasses all of humanity.
And what about the history? Does Ahiman Rezon tell us where Freemasonry claims to have come from?
Oh, it definitely does. It traces its roots all the way back to the beginning, saying that wherever there was symmetry and harmony, the order was present. It even claims that no art or science came before it and highlights its influence during those dark periods of antiquity, giving itself credit for reviving the arts, civilization, and philosophy. Now, whether all that is historically accurate is another discussion, but it shows how much importance the organization places on its perceived ancient origins.
So they're claiming a long and prestigious history. And how does it explain Freemasonry's ability to bridge different cultures and religions, bringing people together from all walks of life?
It points to the secret signs that have been carefully preserved within the fraternity. It calls them a universal language that allows people from completely different backgrounds, like someone from China, Arabia, and England, to recognize each other as brothers, bound by something deeper than just being human. It also stresses tolerance in matters of religion. As long as a member is a good person, their specific beliefs are between them and their God. The idea is that a shared ethical framework can unite people despite their differences.
This universal brotherhood is certainly a central theme in discussions about Freemasonry. Now, the book's title also mentions a prepared brother. What does Ahiman Rezon reveal about the path to becoming a Freemason, the process of becoming prepared?
The text focuses on the symbolism of how a candidate prepares before even stepping foot in the lodge. They're stripped of all outward signs of status or wealth, judged only on their inner worth, their spiritual or moral worth alone. It's about letting go of worldly things, which they see as the key to accessing Masonic knowledge.
So it's all about inner character, not what you wear or how much money you have. What happens during the actual rite of induction?
This is a big deal for the new candidate, the neophyte. The text says most people approach it with a mix of trepidation and awe. They know they're entering into something serious and mysterious. The induction involves a series of symbolic actions meant to represent the new life and responsibilities the candidate is taking on.
And what does this rite symbolize for the individual?
It's like the end of their old, imperfect life and the beginning of a new one, a kind of rebirth marked by purity and virtue. They're turning away from selfishness and discord and facing the unknown, the mysterious future that Masonic teachings are supposed to illuminate. It's a time of prayer and contemplation, preparing for a journey through darkness before they can see the light of Masonic knowledge.
That imagery of moving from darkness to light is really powerful. Our source also includes a prayer that's recited during this early stage. What's the main message of this prayer?
It's a direct appeal to God, asking for blessings on the gathering and for guidance for the candidate. It asks for wisdom so that the candidate, through Masonic principles, can live a better life, a life that reflects holiness. It's basically asking for spiritual support as they start this new journey.
It sounds like a serious commitment is being asked of them right from the get-go. The idea of a journey, a pilgrimage, comes up again later in the text. What other insights does Ahiman Rezon give us on this?
The text stresses that Freemasonry's rituals and symbols, which have been around for ages, offer a lot to explore, way more than you can grasp on the surface. To really get it, we need to try and understand what the founders had in mind, why they created this system in the first place. It's not just about going through the motions, it's about comprehending the deeper meaning behind each symbol and ceremony.
And what are some of the core values or principles that are emphasized along this symbolic path?
Brotherly love is one of the big ones. The text connects it to a passage from Psalm 133, which talks about the blessing of brothers living together in unity. It's compared to the sacred oil used to anoint the high priest, which filled the whole temple with its fragrance. The point is that this bond of brotherhood is essential to the whole Masonic experience.
So unity and a strong sense of community are fundamental. And what about that idea of moving from darkness to light?
Right. Light is presented as a requirement for initiation. It's not just the physical light within the lodge, but also a kind of intellectual illumination, a guiding principle for the candidate's life. The rite of illumination is described as a really ancient and significant ceremony, representing the end of a symbolic journey through darkness. It's about gaining moral and intellectual understanding after overcoming prejudice and ignorance.
It sounds like a profound process of transformation. What are the ultimate goals of this illumination that a Mason seeks?
The goal is to find the light, the truth, which gives dignity to human life, brings freedom to the spirit, and gives a sense of peace to the soul. It's the reward for all the hard work of self-improvement. The symbols associated with this, right, the Bible, the square, and the compasses, those are the great lights, and the burning triangle or three-lighted tapers, the lesser lights, are all visual representations of this release from darkness and the achievement of enlightenment.
Those symbols are definitely some of the most recognizable aspects of Freemasonry. Moving on, our source really emphasizes brotherly love and relief. How does Ahiman Rezon present these concepts?
It says compassion is a key part of being a Mason, something that brings true happiness by actively helping others. Masons are expected to be there for each other in times of need, offering support when someone's struggling. It makes it clear that brother isn't just a word. It comes with real obligations and responsibilities.
So it's not just talk, it's about putting those ideals into action. The text also goes into the symbolism of preparation and fidelity. What can you tell us about that?
They explain that the preparation rituals a candidate goes through, which we talked about earlier, are full of symbolic meaning that points to the moral purpose of Masonic emblems. It all underscores the definition of Freemasonry they give: a system of morality, veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. Prayer, especially kneeling, is presented as something done before any important undertaking, seeking God's blessing. And the right hand is highlighted as a universal symbol of fidelity, even tracing it back to ancient times when the deity was worshipped under the name Fides, which means fidelity.
It's amazing how even seemingly simple actions within the rituals carry so much weight and meaning. Now, the lodge itself, the physical space, is obviously central to Freemasonry. How does Ahiman Rezon describe the lodge and its symbolic setting?
The text mentions that ancient brethren used to hold their meetings on hilltops. This was because high places were seen as closer to the divine, and it's one reason why temples were often built on hills. The placement of the lodge officers, the master in the east, wardens in the west and south, has to do with the sun's movement, with north representing darkness in this context. And the lodge itself is symbolically oriented along an east-west axis.
And they make an interesting comparison to the tabernacle, right?
Yes, they quote Dr. Oliver, who points out the similarities between the tabernacle described in the Bible and a Freemason's lodge. Both have a rectangular shape, pillars representing wisdom, strength, and beauty, an east-west orientation, sacred texts, an altar or foundation stone, a three-colored covering representing the heavens, and a holy floor. The lodge's ceiling is poetically described as the starry-decked heaven, and it's linked to the theological ladder, representing humanity's striving towards the divine.
It's about creating a space that's not just a building, but a place of sacred meaning. Now, the source shifts to charity and the great lights. How do those fit into the fabric of Freemasonry?
Charity is called the brightest gem of Freemasonry. It's about being generous, forgiving, and helping those in need, especially widows, orphans, and the elderly. The Book of the Law, which can be different depending on the member's beliefs, but is always considered sacred, is seen as the ultimate guide for moral behavior, revealing our duties to God. The square and compasses, those familiar symbols, are emblems of how Masons should live their lives, being punctual, doing their duty, and controlling their desires. These great lights are the guiding principles of a Mason's life.
Sounds like those great lights provide a pretty solid moral compass. The text also explores the symbolism of the point within a circle. This is a symbol found in many cultures throughout history. What specific interpretations are offered in the context of Freemasonry?
The text acknowledges that this symbol has a long history and many interpretations. It suggests that it might have initially been connected to Adam, with Adam at the center of the universe and paradise as the outer boundary. Later, with the rise of celestial worship, the point could have represented the sun, moon, or stars, all those celestial bodies that have a circular form.
And what about philosophical or esoteric interpretations?
They definitely mention those. The Pythagorean interpretation, for example, where the point represents the monad, the indivisible God, and the circle represents the duad, the receptive principle. That duality was central to their philosophy and led to the tetractys, a triangular symbol made of 10 points, which was very important to them. The text also says that the point within the circle came to represent the temple of God and the idea of the sun at the center of the solar system. It's incredible how a single symbol can hold so many layers of meaning.
It really is. It's like a visual echo of human thought throughout history. Shifting gears a bit, our source discusses relief and the cardinal virtues. How are these two connected in the Masonic framework?
Relief, which is basically helping those in need, is stressed as a core duty that stems from brotherly love. The text then connects certain unspecified Masonic symbols to the four cardinal virtues: fortitude, prudence, temperance, and justice. These virtues are seen as essential for a Mason's moral development.
Could you tell us a bit more about how those virtues are understood in the context of Freemasonry, even if our excerpt doesn't give specific symbol links?
Sure. Fortitude is described as the strength of mind that allows a Mason to face danger, especially when protecting Masonic secrets. Prudence is about living a life guided by reason, both within the lodge and in the world, being careful not to reveal secrets improperly. Temperance is about controlling desires and passions, avoiding excesses that could lead to compromising information. And justice, although the specific symbol link isn't given here, would generally imply fairness, ethical behavior, and upholding the law.
These sound like pretty solid principles to live by, whether you're a Mason or not. Now, our source moves on to the working tools and this distinction between operative and speculative Masonry. What's the main difference they're highlighting?
The text makes this comparison between a new Mason, the entered apprentice, and a rough ashlar, an unshaped stone. The idea is that through Masonic education, that individual can be transformed into a perfect ashlar, polished and refined. It also mentions the symbolism of earth, reminding us where we come from and where we'll return. But the key point is the difference between operative masonry, which was about actual stone cutting and building, and speculative masonry, which is the modern form that uses those tools and traditions for moral and philosophical teaching.
So it's like a shift from literal building to building character. How does speculative masonry use those operative mason tools in a symbolic way?
It takes those tools, the gavel, gauge, trowel, level, plumb rule, square, compasses, and so on, and gives them new meanings, representing virtues and aspects of self-improvement. The idea is that the speculative mason is also a builder, but they're building a temple of virtue, of honor, of charity within themselves. The tools become symbols of the work, the challenges, and the steps involved in constructing that inner temple. They even bring up the creation story from the Bible as an example of deliberate and purposeful work.
It's a really clever way to connect those abstract ideas to something concrete and familiar. Next, we have the pillars of the porch, J and B. Those are some of the most iconic symbols in Freemasonry. What specific details does Ahiman Rezon give us about them?
The text gives us a description based on the biblical account of the pillars that stood at the entrance of King Solomon's temple. It mentions their size, their ornate decorations like wreaths and pomegranates. It's all very detailed.
And how are those pillars usually interpreted?
Well, most commonly they represent strength and establishment. It's about the foundation upon which both the temple and Freemasonry itself are built. But the text goes further, referencing ancient monuments from different cultures, things like the talayots, burial mounds, Egyptian structures, Greek temples, suggesting that these all reflect this human urge to create lasting memorials and to explore concepts of the infinite. It places the Masonic pillars within this broader history of human spirituality and symbolism.
It's really interesting how they connect those specific Masonic symbols to a wider human story. The source then moves on to the five senses and the seven liberal arts and sciences. Why are those considered important in Masonic teachings?
This part is about developing our human faculties. The five senses sight, hearing, feeling, smelling, tasting are seen as gifts from nature, things we're born with. We should use them wisely and guide them with reason. Hearing, seeing, and feeling are specifically highlighted as being super important for Masons. They go into a bit of detail about each sense, how it works, and why it matters.
What about the seven liberal arts and sciences? Why are those included?
Those are grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. They're presented as additional paths for intellectual growth within Freemasonry. The text briefly defines each one and explains how it can contribute to a Mason's overall understanding of the world. Geometry is given special attention, as it's seen as a way to appreciate the beauty and order of creation, leading to greater admiration for the great cause, the divine architect. It's all about using both our senses and our intellect to better understand ourselves and the universe.
It's a very holistic approach to self-improvement. And now, our source leads us to the symbolism of the winding stairs, a really important symbol, particularly for the fellow craft degree. What does it represent on a deeper level?
The winding stairs are another example of the symbolism of ascent in Freemasonry, like Jacob's ladder, and the idea of resurrection in the Master Mason degree. The fellow craft degree is when a candidate's intellectual education really begins. The winding stairs, which are symbolically located between the porch and the sanctuary, represent discipline, learning, and the hard work of self-improvement that a Mason undertakes in their pursuit of truth.
And is there any significance to the number of stairs? I know it's varied over time.
That's right. Early depictions might have 5 or 7 steps. Some English lectures in the early 1800s describe 38, but the American system usually uses 15, divided into 3 sets, 3, 5, and 7. The use of odd numbers is important because they were seen as perfect, an idea they got from the Pythagoreans. And the number 15 itself was considered sacred in some Eastern traditions and relates to the numerical value of the letters in the name JAH. It's all about a gradual journey of growth and learning.
So the winding stairs aren't just about climbing. They're about the journey of intellectual and spiritual growth, with each step having meaning. This leads us to the third degree, Master Mason. What's the ultimate goal of this highest degree?
The Master Mason degree is about striving for intellectual and moral perfection, aiming for a deep connection with God. They talk about humanity being elevated through this connection with the divine. There's even a reference to the ancient search for the true name of Jehovah, believing that knowing this name held great spiritual power.
It sounds like the combination of the entire Masonic path. What are some key takeaways or lessons associated with this degree?
They stress that you need to be complete in duty to your fellow humans before you can try to guide them. The idea is that the 3 degrees, entered, apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason, form a whole, each building on the previous one. The third degree is also important because it preserves the ancient landmarks of the order, the fundamental principles of Freemasonry. And the Master's Rite is described as being about more than just history. It's about the human condition and the triumph of good over evil. They include a passage about death, reminding us how temporary life is and the importance of leaving a good legacy.
It adds a layer of reflection on life and death to the whole Masonic journey. Our source then shifts to rites of sepulture and King Solomon's temple. How are those two connected in the text?
They start by talking about the universal human practice of burying the dead, acknowledging that different cultures do things differently. They even mention specific Jewish funeral customs of the time with large crowds and professional mourners. The symbolism of trees and flowers is also discussed, like cypress, cedar, and especially acacia, which represent love, hope, and immortality. It's like they're drawing a connection between burial places and the enduring spirit. From there, they transition to King Solomon's Temple, presenting it not just as a historical building, but as a source of symbolic meaning and moral lessons for Freemasons. The temple itself becomes a symbol connected to loss and remembrance.
And what specific details about the temple do they focus on?
They talk about its founding by King Solomon, its location on Mount Moriah, how quickly it was built, only 7.5 years, and some of its more, let's say, legendary aspects, like how it supposedly didn't rain during the day while it was being built, and how no sound of iron tools was heard, symbolizing harmony and divine guidance. They mention the huge workforce and how organized they were. The 2 pillars at the entrance are explained as memorials to the Israelites' escape from Egypt, and the pillars of fire and cloud that guided them. Finally, they give the dimensions and orientation of the temple, comparing it to a modern church with the steeple in the east.
So King Solomon's temple holds a lot of symbolic weight for Freemasons, connecting to both history and deeper allegorical meanings, even tying into those rituals of burial and remembrance. The source then outlines the duties of a Master Mason and lodge officers. What are some of the key responsibilities mentioned?
A Master Mason, having reached the highest degree, has the authority to correct any problems they see in the lodge and to guide newer members. They're also expected to protect the reputation of Freemasonry and avoid anything that could be seen as betraying its principles. They briefly mention the jewels worn by different lodge officers, which symbolize their roles.
It sounds like a system with a clear hierarchy and a focus on supporting and guiding each other. Moving to a broader level, our source describes Grand Lodge and its functions. What are some important aspects of this?
The text describes the special clothing worn by Grand Lodge officers, their collars, aprons, and jewels that show their rank. They outline how new lodges are created, starting with a temporary permission from the Grand Master, and then a formal charter that gives the lodge official recognition. The ceremony for consecrating a new lodge is also described, with some variations depending on who's in charge.
So the Grand Lodge is basically about organizing and overseeing Freemasonry on a larger scale. They then go on to discuss the consecration of a new lodge. What are the key symbolic actions involved in this ceremony?
It involves a dedication to the Holy Saints John, who are important figures in Freemasonry, and the sprinkling of corn, wine, and oil on the lodge. Corn represents nourishment, wine is for refreshment, and oil symbolizes joy and peace. The ceremony also emphasizes the importance of acknowledging God, trusting Him during tough times, and hoping for a reward for good deeds.
Those symbols definitely tie into the core values we've been talking about. Our source then provides details on Masonic burial services and the Lodge of Sorrow. It seems like a very important aspect of Masonic fellowship and support.
It absolutely is. The text explains that Masonic burial services can be adjusted for different situations. It describes how they prepare the lodge room for a Lodge of Sorrow, draping everything in black, placing a skull and a lit candle on the master's pedestal as reminders of mortality, and setting up a coffin-like platform called a catafalque, decorated with flowers. The opening remarks focus on expressing respectful sorrow, caring for the deceased soul, and affirming faith in God. They describe a procession around the catafalque and the placing of white flowers and an evergreen wreath, which symbolize remembrance, the bond between brothers, belief in immortality, and the lasting impact of good actions. It ends with a prayer for God's mercy and the deceased's eternal rest.
It sounds like a beautiful and moving way to honor their departed brothers. They also mentioned the consecration of a Masonic cemetery. What's special about this type of cemetery?
They emphasize the natural beauty of the cemetery, preferring trees and flowers over big, elaborate monuments. The focus is on the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, and on creating a peaceful place for remembrance. They talk about connecting with the spirits of those buried there, highlighting this unbreakable bond that extends beyond death.
It's about creating a final resting place that reflects Masonic values and symbolism. Lastly, our source briefly touches on Masonic trials. What can you tell us about how they handle disputes or misconduct within the fraternity?
They give a general overview of the process. It starts with formal accusations against a member, followed by an investigation and a hearing conducted by a panel. This panel then presents their findings. There's also a possibility of appealing to the Grand Lodge for review. Throughout the process, it's important to give the accused person proper notice, ensure a fair hearing, and keep thorough records. It's a structured system designed to ensure justice and accountability.
It's a reminder that even within a brotherhood, there are rules and procedures for dealing with internal issues. Well, this deep dive into Ahiman Rezon has been fascinating. We've gone through the potential meanings of that puzzling title, explored the symbolism from the tracing board to the point within a circle and the winding stairs, discussed the core values of morality, brotherly love and relief, examined the rituals, and even learned a bit about the organizational aspects of Freemasonry.
Absolutely. What we see in this book is a system that's full of symbolism and allegory, with a clear focus on self-improvement, both morally and intellectually, and even spiritually. And while the title might make you think of secrets and exclusivity, what we've really explored are those enduring principles of virtue, community, and a connection to something bigger than ourselves.
It makes you think about how these traditions, like those found in Freemasonry, can still offer insights into human nature and our search for meaning, even in today's world. Maybe some of our listeners will be inspired to dig deeper into the history and symbolism of Freemasonry on their own.
It's definitely a topic with a lot to offer, centuries of history, and a vast array of symbols just waiting to be explored.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through Ahiman Rezon. We hope it's given you a new perspective on this fascinating and historically significant book.